welcome to Sloans Abroad. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about something I have been dying to share for quite some time. So, back in July of 2021, I gave birth to my son, Alden, unassisted at home. And not only did I give birth unassisted at home, but I did my entire pregnancy unassisted as well. So, what is an unassisted pregnancy and birth? An unassisted pregnancy is whenever a woman chooses not to enter the industrial birth system, and she takes radical responsibility for herself and her child that is growing within her womb and decides to take care of the pregnancy herself. And she decides to give birth herself, which is exactly what I decided to do. And I knew I was going to do this before I ever came to South Korea. I knew that if I had a fourth child and I had him or her in South Korea, that I would not be entering the hospital system. I knew about the abusive birth practices in South Korea, forced episiotomies in a lot of cases, a 42% C-section rate that I was very much uncomfortable with. And then with the advent of the pandemic and all of the insanity that ensued around that, masking during childbirth, taking away your baby for days at a time. And while not everyone had that exact same experience, it varied from hospital to hospital, the policies changed sometimes from hour to hour. And I wasn't going to leave my birth up to chance. I had given birth once before at home and it was a wonderful experience. So I did all of my prenatal care myself. I used a Fetoscope, I used a Doppler. I learned how to take my own blood pressure. I charted everything. I was very, very meticulous about it, and probably more meticulous than I needed to be, but it was good to know that I was taking care of myself fully. And a lot of you may question whether or not it is even safe to give birth unassisted at home. And I will not be going into all of that today. There is a plethora of information out there on the internet about how many women do this and how safe it is. It is far safer than entering an abusive industrial birth system in which you're putting your care into the hands of a trained surgeon. By choosing to have the type of birth that I wanted, darkness, quiet, peace, with the ability to eat and drink as much as I wanted to, not being separated from my child, not being separated from my family, with the ability to move, and with the ability to allow labor to start and stop as many times as it wanted to, there was no way I was going to be able to get that in the obstetric birth system here. So I chose to stay at home. So when I found out that I was pregnant, I was beyond ecstatic. I was very excited, and I'd already had a plan in place and I knew exactly what I was going to do. Now, contrary to popular belief, there's really not much you need to do or are able to do within the first trimester of pregnancy. Although I will say these two things were the absolute most important for me. Number one, stay moving. I'm a competitive powerlifter and a Spartan racer, so it was very important to me that I kept up with my lifting, my running, and my walking routines. The second thing that was so very important to me was making sure my diet was in check. Prior to my pregnancy, I was very strict carnivore. Currently, I'm also again very strict carnivore. That's a video for another day. Yes, I eat only meat. Another little weird thing about me, I do that for a variety of health reasons, and it also keeps me out of pain. That's also another video. I decided to jump right back into the Brewer pregnancy diet. It is the only pregnancy diet that I have ever followed in all of my pregnancies, and I credit it to having no problems. I've never had a single problem in all of my pregnancies, and I really credit it to my diet. Dr. Brewer was the doctor who discovered it, along with midwife Anne Fry, and they both have put out information about how vitally important it is to get a minimum of 100 grams to about 130 grams of protein every single day as a pregnant woman. And that's even on the low range of things. It is far more than that for twin pregnancies. Dr. Brewer and midwife Anne Fry were both able to prevent and reduce pregnancy-induced hypertension, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, all these things which are, and I would argue, very much are controlled by your diet. Don't let anyone fool you into saying that it is genetic. The only thing genetic about it is eating the way that your parents ate. I heard his heartbeat for the first time at around 12 weeks. I used my Doppler, which I only used for a couple of seconds. At 15 weeks, we did find out the gender. I made an appointment at Women's MediPark to go get one ultrasound. Boy! To make sure that I was eating enough, I also did a urine check every 4 weeks until the end of pregnancy, where I did it every 2 weeks and then every week until I gave birth. Another one of the tools I used during my pregnancy were these strips. They detect amniotic fluid. It was really helpful for me at the end of my pregnancy whenever I had 2 instances of the outer bag of my amniotic sac begin to leak. I was not at all worried, as I did not have a temperature, continued hydrating, and the bag of water just refilled. So instead of the Doppler, I used a Fetoscope, which is a special stethoscope that is long and is shaped in such a way to where it is very easy to hear the baby's heartbeat if you know how to use it. I did that in conjunction with belly mapping, which is a concept taught by Spinning Babies. The link is below in the description for that website, and I was able to determine what position he was in at one point. At one point he was breech, at another point he was transverse. Yeah, you had and tell him about it, huh? You a tough cookie. So I was able to tell what position he was in. I was able to tell exactly how far along I was by measuring my fundal height with a measuring tape. At one point, I did go to a chiropractor up in Pyeongtaek to go get my hips adjusted before the birth. That was particularly interesting because the chiropractor told me that I was too fat to birth a baby. Granted, I began my pregnancy at 135 pounds, and I ended my pregnancy at 205 pounds, which I was perfectly okay with. It is the pregnant woman's job to gain 50 to 60% of her blood supply during her pregnancy and should not restrict weight gain at all. So my pregnancy was incredibly uneventful. I took care of all of my prenatal care myself. Obviously, I had a very healthy baby. I will do a part 2 on his birth. It was honestly the most intense experience of my life. It taught me so much about myself. It really taught me how birth really comes to tear us to pieces and how important it is to allow the process of breaking down to happen and how a hospital birth robs us of that experience and how important it is to be broken before we can rebuild. So that's all from me for today. I hope this is at least mildly interesting to anyone who has been curious about how my pregnancy went. Obviously had no complications. It was pretty straightforward, pretty boring. So that's it for this time. Alden, you say bye-bye? Say bye-bye. Yeah.